Ding, ding. I holla.
Bum. 3 reasons Michael Olowokandi, born April 3rd, 1975, was a bad pick. Why is it that number 1 picks take so much criticism for turning out to be good players or not, but the 2nd or 3rd overall picks over the years escape that lifelong criticism, and even when they are disappointing, it's nothing compared to what it means to have been selected as the top pick and failed? No one talks about the blasphemy of Reaf La Frentz being selected before 6 All-Stars and 3 Hall of Famers, assuming Dirk Nowitzki and Vince Carter are both enshrined at some point in the near future. Reaf was also taking picks ahead of his college teammate Paul Pierce, the only of the 3 already enshrined. But if I see it from a worldly perspective, I get why people think he's a bum. With this pick, you're essentially saying that this player, we not only think he's the best fit for our team, but is the best in the draft and has the best chance to succeed in the league. The thing about drafting in general is you get no trial period. You don't get to see how this player fits in the NBA and on your team, or if his body will hold up, or if he'll even care about success after he receives his NBA contract. Before Anthony Bennett, Olowakandi, aka the Candyman, held the title for the worst number 1 pick of all time. Of course, those lists are subjective, but on average, the typical basketball fan took the ring to his name and burned him year after year with anti-Candyman jokes until there was another horrible selection that came along and took that place. Was Michael Olowokandi a horrible draft selection? Yes. He averaged 8 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 1.4 blocks a game in 9 seasons. Of those, played 82 games just 1 time and double-figure averages just twice. Some say the pressure of being the first overall pick and the small window given to have success can be factors number 1 picks who's had a bad start completely lose control mentally and torpedo throughout their career. Olowokandi was taken number 1 in the midst of the golden era for big men, so at 7 foot, ready or not, the NBA was coming for him, as his height and play style, even though brief, was just what they were looking for. But there were a lot of issues with this pick that should have been considered prior, ones that teams have learned a lot from in the years after. A former conference player of the year in college that just couldn't find his footing in the league, especially with the number 1 pick monkey hanging over his shoulder. Here's why Michael Olowokandi was a bad first pick that should have never been in that situation in the first place. Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Michael Olowokandi was a 7-foot center born in Lagos, Nigeria, and moved to London, England at 4 years old. Although he was always bigger than his friends, he played height-not-required sports like soccer and track and field and was pretty good at both. He's often credited soccer for his advanced footwork. He'd play these sports all throughout his childhood and set records he'd break himself in them. By 16 years old, he grew to 6'8" and was clearly in the wrong sport. Stunt number 1, really late blooming. I don't think I've ever seen a later bloomer than Michael Olowokandi. It's reported the first time he ever touched a basketball in a way as to say he's going to take this serious was 17 years old. He didn't begin actually playing until he turned 18. Talk about a late start. That's more like thrown in the fire and sink or swim. Fortunately for Michael, he was a natural at it and destined to find that path in life. The soccer and track and field background were now coming in handy for the light-footed big man, mobile enough to elude any 5-man in the league. But 18 years old is just too late of a start for me to ever consider taking a player with the number 1 pick. He'd have to be LeBron James good, and LeBron didn't become that by playing soccer and running track and field in his younger life. Make matters worse, in his first year in college, a technical one at that, one that stressed education first, second, and third, he played more sports not named basketball. Rugby, track and field, and cricket? There was obviously no deep love and passion for basketball, and is another reason I could never take a player of this pedigree with the number one selection. On his 20th birthday, he flipped through a college magazine, calling schools like Duke and Georgetown and informing them he was a 7-footer interested in playing for their school. Receiving all rejections from high-level programs, he tried his hand at the University of Pacific. The team showed interest but had no more scholarships to offer. Michael offered to pay his own tuition, and the deal was done. He arrived on campus and met his coaches for the first time with a check in his hand and 3 years of eligibility. Also with him was 0 games of organized basketball under his belt and a 3-year window before he'd be taken with the number 1 pick and all the expectations that come with it. Because let's be real, no one cares about the backstory of a failed number 1 pick. He struggled in year 1, averaging just 4 points a game in college and 4 rebounds in 10 minutes a game, which isn't at all that bad, especially when you factor in the 1.3 blocks he averaged as well. In year 2, he got more minutes and the hang of this basketball thing, but wasn't until year 3 he showed he could dominate a mid-major conference like the Big West. He averaged 22 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 blocks in year 3 in 31 minutes a game and was named the Conference Player of the Year. For a 7-footer, that's enough to fast-track you straight to the first pick, and that's the problem. Stunt number 2, what's new? A 7-footer with injuries. Nothing unheard of about that. Olowakandi has had knee issues that troubled him ever since he began playing in college. Being a bigger kid that grew way too fast for his body to strengthen, his knees took the biggest hit. After being taken in the lockout 98-99 season, mainly because Elgin Baylor, the VP of basketball operations, was convinced by Olowakandi's summer workouts and improvement, he headed overseas to play while the NBA resolved its issues. He played in the Italian League for 3 games and the Euro League, where his team granted his early release because he was underperforming and his conditioning was poor. The lockout ended and the season began with much of the same. Olowakandi underperforming for a number 1 pick and issues with his conditioning. He signed with the Clippers in January 1999 and by May was having his first of many knee surgeries. The Clippers gave the Olowakandi experiment 3 years before they went in a different direction with Darius Miles, Lamar Odom, and Quentin Richardson as the new, young, exciting kids on the block. Michael would have a few double-digit scoring seasons in 01-02 and 02-03, where he only played 36 games due to injury. After that year, he'd never come close to 36 games again in the NBA, and surgeries slowing him down. Stunt number 3, attitude issues. One thing that surprised me about Olowakandi is I never knew he had so much issues with his attitude. These issues cost him even before he played a game in the NBA. Mentioned briefly earlier, he was released by his FIBA team not only because he was out of shape, but also because the team had issues with Olowakandi showing interest in practice and workouts, and claims his body language was some of the worst they'd seen. It's not at all shocking, seeing as a player without the initial love for the game will probably not care how his attitude comes off because he never cared about the sport anyway. It's not like he needed the money either. His parents paid for his schooling and he had his degree, so what's stopping him from acting out? During the lockout, the Clippers hired Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to work with Michael, and Kareem said himself that Olowakandi's attitude and work ethic was poor and that he couldn't handle constructive criticism, that he was, quote, an athletic washout. This was backed by the Clippers actually having to once fine him $50,000 for conduct detrimental to the team and being a negative influence in the locker room. I always saw Olowakandi as the soft-spoken, out-the-way player. Never knew his attitude issues were this important to stunning his growth. All in all, the experience of being a top pick in such a short time had to feel exciting for Olowakandi. But because height basically forced him to play a sport he never liked, he turned out to be a bum in the league and considered the biggest bust and worst number one pick of all time, before Anthony Bennett, of course. He last played in Boston in 2006-2007, averaging 1 point and 2 rebounds in 24 games. He was good enough to be a first pick, but I wonder how good he could have been had these things not happened. Salute to him, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth, and I'm out.